Good morning, everyone. Well, afternoonish kind of thing. How are you doing? Good? Awake? Great. I'm Silvio. My name is Silvio Lorusso. I'm going to moderate this panel. I'm very happy to do so. I'm going to read a little bit of a very small introduction. And basically we will have, I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of the structure of this panel. So I'm going to read a brief introduction. Then we will have short presentations, introduction by the guest panelists. We will enter in conversation, and at that point, anyone is invited to ask questions. I'm going to open up the floor in the middle. Then we'll converse some more questions, all over and again, like a loop, infinite loop of this. Today, we will try to locate, identify, and characterize what the transmediale curators aptly dub the digital middleman. According to the panel description, the digital middleman acts as a broker, a go-between, a disruptor in creative processes. It is basically an entity, sometimes shady and sometimes blatantly visible, that mediates our network lives, smuggling input and outputs, misrepresenting or even over-representing us by means of data and data models. That said, a psychoanalytic question immediately arises. And is this digital middleman in the room with us right now? I'm afraid that after familiarizing ourselves with the work of the Bitniks, Farzin, and Simone, our answer will be a hard yes. What you see on screen is a little tweak of the well-known simple net art diagram created in 1997 by the duo MTAA, which helped us frame an issue which I would be happy to discuss with the panelists. If the middle is occupied by the gargantuan digital intermediaries that we all know, what's the place of the artist, or broadly speaking, the creative practitioner? Here I'd like to advance a timid proposition. If digital platforms are middlemen, artists could be midwives, bringing about the birth of the new, and hopefully the better, with care and ultrasound capabilities. Does this sound silly? Well, we will soon find out. But before that, I'm going to read some very squeezed bio so we can immediately jump into your presentation and research obsessions. So let's do this, bio time. Mediengruppe Bitnik is a duo of contemporary artists working on and with the internet, formed by Carmen Weiskopf and Doma Smoglio. Their practice expands from the digital to affect physical spaces, often intentionally applying loss of control to challenge established structures and mechanisms. Farzin Lotfi-Jam is assistant professor in architecture at Cornell University and director of Farzin, multidisciplinary design studio working across architecture, urbanism, computation, and media. His work explored the political implication of technology and computation through exhibition practice. Simone Niquille is a designer and researcher based in Amsterdam. Her practice, Technoflash, investigates the representation of identity and the digitization of biomass in the network space of appearance. Currently, she is researching the use of digital capture technology for evidence production with the long-term project Parametric Truth. I guess we can start. Shall we start with you, Doma and Carmen?
Yeah.
Sorry, the other laptop. No problem.
Yeah. Thanks for the great introduction, and we're really happy to be here today. We're Mediengruppe Bitnik, Doma. My name is Carmen. We've been looking at the digital middleman probably more from the perspective of surveillance technologies. So all technology, in effect, is or can be surveillance technology. And we've been kind of looking at how this has changed over time, with surveillance technology in the beginning being, separate entities in urban landscapes that you would see, like cameras, so it was very visible. This surveillance technology has become more opaque, more hidden, part of other networks or all networks that track you. So, for example, I'm thinking of Google Maps. If you want to use Google Maps, you have to tell Google Maps your location. Otherwise, it's a bit pointless. So Google Maps is always also, sees where you are while you're seeing where you're going, that kind of relationship. So this also changes kind of the digital middleman. So it's always something that looks at you and interprets whatever you do or, what it sees in some way. And we've been kind of wondering about this digital middleman because as surveillance technologies disappear, it always also disappears. So you're kind of not sure who's looking at you, what they're looking at, what data they're getting out of that. For example, you have Samsung already in 2015 had a TV where they had to change the user policy to say you should not talk about anything private in the presence of the television because the television may or may not record everything you're saying. So this suddenly kind of brings in a device, through your television brings in a surveillance device into your private space. And this is always like really interesting to us. Where do these digital middlemen come in? How do they find their way into our homes, for example? And a first work we'd like to just briefly show you where we've tried to think about this or think this through has been around home, what at the time when they came out were called intelligent personal assistants. So this is home automation devices. They're usually the kind of the core of anything, if you want to automate your home, you need one of these to as kind of the brains of your smart home. And we looked at Google Home, are they called Google Homes? And Amazon Echo devices. The interesting thing for us about these devices when they came out was that they finally, made the shift to the no-hands computer. This has been around as an idea for, Space Odyssey 2001, this kind of idea that you would be able to talk to the computer and the computer is not separate from you, it's not an entity you have to walk up to and type into, but it surrounds you. So at any time you just talk and the computer answers. This was kind of HAL. And these devices kind of did that. They did that, fairly well, sometimes very terribly, but you could talk to them and they would connect whatever you said directly to the internet. This was really interesting to us because, of course, it brings a few problems, like the question of, do these devices always listen? How do they know when I'm talking to the device and when I'm talking, this kind of, it makes it kind of, the digital middleman suddenly becomes something that's always there and that starts haunting your home. It's kind of this, yeah.
So we were looking kind of like in this space, also kind of like I'm very interested in the home as performance space. So the question was, how can we kind of like perform like in somebody's home? Is there a way kind of like to enter somebody's home, to activate those devices, to play with them, to intervene into it? So we thought kind of like music is a nice medium for that because you can just like, you could kind of like trigger things through radio play or trigger things by, just having loudspeakers, playing it loud and your neighbor's devices can hear it maybe. So we ended up kind of like with 3 songs produced together with a French electronic musician from Paris called LoJack. And it's 3 songs and it starts with this kind of like love relation between kind of like you and this new smart thing which is at home, and you get like a personal relationship, and it gets darker and darker. Like the third song is really about kind of like, hey, I need to stop this. Can we delete the calendar? Can we do this? And we might just like listen to 1.5 minutes of this.
So this is the Anxiety, the third, the dystopian song.
Hello. High-speed, intelligent personal assistants all around listening to everything I say. I brought you into my home. You scare me. Alexa, crime snooping time is now and always forever. Alexa, I used to bark commands at you. Now I say please and thank you. Never mess with someone who knows your secrets. Siri, there is nowhere far enough to hide from you. Oh, okay Google, are you laughing at me? You used to answer that. Now you disengage. Never enough digital street smarts to outsmart you, Alexa. 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 Hey, Anxiety, I want my control back. I want my home back. Siri, delete my calendar. Siri, hold my calls. Siri, delete my contacts. Okay, Google, what's the loneliest number? Okay, Google, stop. Okay, Google, stop. Okay, Google, no, please, stop. Alexa, help. Alexa, disable Uber. Alexa, disable lighting. Alexa, disable Amazon Music Unlimited. Alexa, quit. Hey Siri, activate airplane mode. If you need me, I'll be offline in the real world.
Oh, wow.
Farzin, do you?
Go?
Sure.
Is that the? I don't want to stuff things up. Is this okay?
Yeah, then we can come back in case, but yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Farzin, and I jumped in. I think so. I'm going to my contribution to today is going to be some extracts from a film called My Domestic Routines. And so when we first started talking about this group, everyone realized that we have a series of projects that are looking at how middlemen are starting to come into our most intimate spaces. And so we've kind of started to focus on a few of the projects to show that. And so the project I want to show, this kind of title screen, it starts with this, I guess, trying to sort of a mechanical way of describing what the film's about, which is really putting two scales of sort of archives of image production in relation together about how my own subjectivity was formed through the technologies that surround me. And so one scale of the images is automatic images that were produced through smart technologies that I installed inside my house for 5 weeks and saw how it saw me. And the second set was photographs of growing up as an immigrant in Australia, first actually in Iran, then Australia, that my mother had taken. So I was kind of, as I started to work on, a lot of my projects are attempting to render visible the sort of structural logics that surround us. But as I work more on sort of confronting these asymmetrical sort of confrontations with big technology companies, I'm realizing that somehow putting something personal, showing how these technologies form our own subjectivities is maybe one of the most powerful, but I guess vulnerable ways that we can kind of work through that. So this is actually the first time I'm kind of doing something like that. And so there's just these 4 kind of sort of scenes in it, and it has these different cold opens, but just in terms of locating the middle man, this is it. And so why do I need Weber and Apple to sit between me and my pork chop? Why does my pork chop need to be remotely monitored? So I'll just skip through a bunch of little segments in it, but to locate the middleman, I think it's operating at 2 or 3 different scales. One is the physical object that sits between me and my pork chop.
Grandfather built a 5-story
Let's
housing
put this
complex
smaller.
with a pair of 2-bedroom.
Yeah. So this will just show you some segments, some of these other sort of the second set of images that I was talking about. That's me. Look, I used to be cute. We're all trying to sort of put cute things in to lighten up your day. I put myself in. That's me in shorts. Look, still cute. And so there's a whole kind of narrative that's happening now. But I guess, in terms of this conversation today, the middleman for me as an architect is that physical device that sits between my pork chop, but it's the fact that the data from the pork chop is getting broadcast to a whole series of networks, and that fact that, there's a type of desire that's being produced for us to kind of monitor things within our home. And so when I started working on this project, I was really interested in, I think we all know that command and control technologies have gone from sort of managing cities to managing our lifestyles and have entered into our homes. But there's a kind of a glee around monitoring that I was kind of interested in trying to figure out, like this obsession with seeing ourselves and photographing ourselves, and a sort of neurotic anxiety that's part, built up on security and fear, and part built up on total sort of obsessions with the self. So I just try to lean into that hardcore. So this is us growing up, but I try to offset it by these sort of, personal archives that looks at how immigration policy also formed my sort of pathway to domestic ownership. So that's what that one was. And then there's a series of, cataloging. I'll just sort of switch it off because the music's annoying. So it's chirpy.
Control routines are present in the most intimate places.
So I'll skip through this, but I started to look at how these different types of behaviors and ways of seeing start to get inscribed into our behaviors. So motion detection, what's this one? Identifying persons, that one's kind of fun. Packages are recognized, we all know that. There's so many YouTube videos with people doing the door cams, right? There's an entire sort of media culture surrounding these technologies. And then this one gets fun. So here we go. Ready for it? That's my finger. It's not so cute. Finger. And then what does the finger do? Finger pushes buttons. But the finger pushes button on something that's now wireless. And so the middleman enters again. That something as simple as a light switch is now being connected to a network. And that all our motions. And so the entire thing ends with this kind of recreation of my house, where I'm playing out every single possible permutation of smart routines. So every single type of smart object has been installed inside my house, and I'm kind of playing out those possibilities of how I interact with them and how it affects my behavior. And there's this moment where the crescendo is to kind of take surveillance tracking media sort of cinematic shots and apply it to the most cute sort of graphics, because I think we all recognize that a lot of these domestic assistants enter into our homes as innocuous, friendly, cute objects. And so I was kind of trying to figure out how those two things work together as well. Thanks.
So yes, I'll talk about 2 projects, and sort of the focus of that, and I think for this panel, was very much on computer vision. I think one position that, for me at least, as a person making things, was important in that is that I started off doing a bunch of work around face recognition technology, trying to obfuscate it, sort of try to escape it. And it really made me feel like a bug report, like I'm sort of pointing out what's not working into technology, possibly, maybe actually making it better. So achieving sort of the opposite of what I would have wanted to. And so one thing I was curious in from those projects is just trying from a sort of maker's point to understand how computer vision might function. And I mean, the cat I always like, but mainly because I think it's an image as a human being, you're more or less trained to detect and try and figure out what the hell is going on. But trying to then describe what sort of information is within an image like this to another entity that isn't thinking, even though we use those words, is an entirely different endeavor. Similarly to this shark, which I think sort of talks about computer vision in a good way, as in running this image through two different kinds of image analysis sets, really shows what kind of information, for one, is sort of read in the image, but also talks about the training data that was used to create the algorithm. And so this is what we'll sort of get to. And what we're looking at is basically one, which is the left side, is looking at the shape. So it's picking up, you know, sort of the shark, the hammerhead shark, the great white shark, fish. And the one on the right is picking up the texture, so it's looking at sort of the color profile of the image, which of course creates a completely different reading of this image. And so my question was, I mean, I was interested in the domestic because for one, it's a place where it's made for the human being, but the human body isn't so omnipresent. So I think I was a little bit, for one, frustrated, but also fed up with making work where I showed a human body. So I had to sort of recreate the thing I'm trying to, you know, let free. I think specifically with 3D technology, that was difficult. You always end up with a very standardized avatar. And so the domestic space was a good one because there's all kinds of objects that are talking or are sort of ergonomically, supposedly for some kind of body without having to show it. At the same time, it's supposed to be a private space. So how do you actually collect data, visual data, to create, you know, sort of automated things that are supposed to sort of move through this. And this is a robot dog by Boston Dynamics that I think some of you probably know by now. It was marketed as their first device that isn't for the army, but could actually also be used in offices and homes. They sort of specifically saying we were inspired by our time being a company at Google, where the Google offices are designed to be homes, right? Sort of a very comfortable space, so you spend too much time there. And so I was curious about this thing because what you're looking at is sort of the test environment. It's in a warehouse, but it looks like a house. And it's supposed to sort of show how well this thing functions. And you know, Boston Dynamics being a private company, there's really no access to their training data set except for this video. And so I just recreated this house in 3D. And I thought what was interesting to me as sort of this first step is that, you know, I didn't have to model anything. I mean, all of these 3D, well, the stuff that was in the home was already a ready available 3D asset because it's all IKEA. The home is sort of this very catalog-y, you know, Sears home that was a thing in like the 20s in America where you would buy a home out of a catalog. So everything was already hyper standardized within the home itself, but also for me as someone recreating this. So it was really just plug and play. And I think that told a ton about, you know, the way that these virtual things, but also the actual environments are assembled. And sort of fast forward to, this is a trailer to a film called Homeschool. And there's two films, one is Homeschool, the other one is Sorting Song. And what they're looking at is one specific training data set that's created within an academic content. So there is access to this data. Also, there's access because what they did is they collected 3D data, so 3D assets, so floor plans and objects that then they would use to generate spaces, render those, and those images then are the training data sets. Of course, where you get sort of huge amounts of 3D data was just, you know, SketchUp Warehouse and any sort of places that any of us actually could access game engine assets. So the data was never there, so they really had to sort of, it was already in the public space, so to speak. This is literally what it looks like, as in this is the kind of data that you would find in these folders when you download the zip. And so what I was interested in, and to sort of quickly round off this introduction, is you know, what's sort of behind this very visual data as well, as in how is it categorized. What you're looking at here is the object inventory. So literally the kinds of objects that they would have. You know, there's a few weird ones like a sword and a toy that also point to where this data might come from, which is, you know, much more gaming assets, much more violent. An airplane, I think, depends on scale. Like, are we talking about a toy or are we talking about a huge airplane, which would be strange in a home? This one as well, where they're showing diagrammatically the distribution of these objects through the different kinds of domestic spaces. So I think on the one hand, there's an assumption about what kind of rooms make up a home, which probably isn't true for everyone. And at the same time, also, they were, as computer engineers, I was having interviews with them, they were super upset that there was a mailbox in all of these rooms. I thought this was, like, you know, beautifully absurd. But it really was just because they made an assumption, like, hey, there's boxes in all kinds of rooms, forgetting that a mailbox might also be a box, and that's supposed to be outside. So there's always this sort of strange ambiguity that happens with, you know, assumptions within computer engineering, at least in this case, and stuff that has been solved in other fields, right? Be it linguistics, talking about fuzzy borders, be it sociology, or even product design. Similarly, chairs, right? Sort of the frightening, sort of, you know, perfect, like to the detail reconstruction of the electric chair at Sing Sing, just hanging out in this folder chair that is supposed to be domestic. And at the same time, it's hilarious. You have the toilet, you know, and you have the stroller. So, yes. The last example is just talking about the scales of this. So I think we go from sort of the labeling and sort of the linguistic side of these data sets to the actual models and how they're sorted, and then to textures. And even on this level, sort of the top right, I was really fascinated by, there's a folder, literally again, about all kinds of images that they will put on media surfaces, so be it a TV or be it a projection, and this is an office, of course. And, you know, there's 3 files in this folder, and they're all Fox News. So again, you know, there's sort of this question of what's the human, like, who made this decision? Does that matter? Is it funny? Is it not? And so I think there's a, you know, as someone then making work about this, I think in the films I try to sort of point out the funny side. But mainly to say that it's also pretty dramatic and problematic in terms of how these worlds are being created. And specifically the standards that are embedded by happenstance, often, I would assume. But yes, thank you.
Wow, thanks so much for this introduction. They were like so rich, and I mean, I wanted to start with the serious question, but now after I see this, I have to ask you, what kind of TV show would you put there if you had the chance?
I don't know, something more realistic, like Emily in Paris. No, but I mean something terrible, you know, that like
exactly.
we do actually all watch. Yeah, Emily in Paris.
Emily in Paris,
Yes.
a good answer.
Thanks.
Any preference? Would you say like have a nice representation of the standard house domestic space?
ABC News, Fox News, CNN. I would just put it all in, and I would try to not put myself in this position to have to decide. Deciding's hard.
Yeah. You don't watch TV, I guess. I mean, one thing I would like to start with is like to consider the fact that somehow you are like the people who interact like the most and more like deeply with these technologies. Like most people, for example, would use Amazon Echo to set the alarm clock or like to start, to start like their playlist. So my question is a pretty personal one, and has to do with which middleman have you somehow surrendered to or like accepted in your life or like struggle or like some that you really can't stand, and if you see them in other people's houses, you are like, no, I'm not going to enter here. You stop at the door. I think, for example, at that period in which you had like the Amazon button you remember, like, does it still exist, by the way? Yeah, I haven't never seen it in real life. Maybe in the US, but like that was like a bit. I mean, I would be tempted to press it a lot. So yeah.
Well, I mean, you also raise a good question, right? At what point do you not enter someone's home because of the devices they might have in there? And at what point do you find out you need to have like a warning, right? Like you have to sign an NDA.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I think for myself, it's just a smartphone. Like, you know, at some point there was a grand idea to not have. Well, probably, you know, at some point it's like, I'm not going to use Apple, so hey, I'm going to use like the Google Pixel. It's like, it's not, you know. And then it was just, I think there's a certain convenience. Also, like, you know, running my own studio, I think there's a layer of administration that happens anyways. So also on that level, I think for me it was, you know, maybe not, again, using Apple, using different kinds of operating systems, et cetera, be it even like a search engine, right, so not sort of seeing devices. But I think there I also realized that there's a level of upkeep that I simply can't keep up with. And it sort of became a MacBook Pro again. But I think there's this constant realization there as well, as in, as someone making work, I critique certain technologies, but I'm still also very much part of them, right? I can't necessarily escape. And there's a certain level where that's useful, because I do need to know, or I want to know how they work and what the effect might be to actually make work about them. But at the same time, it's also just, I'm a human being needing to sleep, and I can't like just update Windows all the time. So I think there's this weird thing, right, where it's like you're a person making things, being critical, but you're also still just a human being. And where those two meet, I think definitely always sort of is in flux. Yeah.
Yeah, as I was looking at your amazing projects, I was just thinking about how dependent our artistic and critical practices are on these companies, right? We have such a dependency issue, right? So like it's such a source of our kind of production. And so I was thinking about that, and that's why I was like, and I want to kind of like try to precisely define what we mean by the middleman a little bit, right? And so I think there is a kind of thought that there's some form of economic extraction, right? That there is an information economy that's occurring, and that I think many people now are, broad swaths of the public are very aware of that, right? And there's that kind of, I don't know, Wendy Chun's kind of amazing, like, paranoia, freedom kind of axes that we're sort of moving between, right? And we've kind of gone from alarm to, I don't know, surrender in some way. Like, just in the last 3 or 4 years, I was kind of talking to someone about this yesterday. I remember the New York Times, like 4 years ago, was just writing articles after articles about these third-party data brokers and all the information that was being extracted about us. And then something about the sort of data-driven journalism that they do now, and something about COVID and sort of the rise of the model. Now they're using those third-party brokers themselves, right? So something's like shifted, right? Like it's gone from just these like large technology companies extracting, being the middleman, to everybody now wants to create their own ecosystem. And in my work, when I was looking at how some of these technologies that I was showing in the domestic space was first operating through smart cities, what I've noticed is now that within precincts now, urban developers are creating their own ecosystems of sort of information extraction. So it's just nested, I guess it's like this nested sort of set of bubbles of different resolutions of information that's being collected by us. And I was just thinking about that. I'm so not answering your question. I was just thinking about that when Amazon, they have their new kind of, they brought the Roomba, right, because they want to scan the interior. And I was just like, what could Amazon like learn from the Roomba that they don't already know about us? Like Amazon knows everything about my domestic interior, right? And so there is like this kind of, in my work, I'm just trying to show, exactly what you're saying, like specifically, how do these technologies work? What is their spatial capability? How do they sort of see our bodies from, these instruments of automatic image production? And how does that get reinscribed back on us. So to answer your question, for that project I showed, I purchased all these smart home objects from IKEA, and I actually started that project because I was so fascinated by these videos of people standing like there, and these blinds would go up and down, and they'd be like there, and the music would be gleefully playing, and then they press a button like this, a wireless button, and then they'd look, and the blind would go, and it was just like agonizingly slow, but they just had to hold it, and so I bought all those blinds, I installed it in my house, I made the film. And then I returned them, and I got these like Venetian blinds. And every morning I like open 10 of these Venetian blinds, and it takes time. And I'm like, I should have kept the blinds. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a similar experience when we were working with the Amazon Echoes. We have a son, he was about 7 at the time. And we were, working in the studio, but also at home with these devices. And at one point, I brought him to bed, and he said, "Mom, no, I forgot to say goodnight to Alexa." And you kind of realize, how for him, of course, it's just the presence, it's not questioned in that way. And that kind of, it freaks you out because you can, as people, we try to build awareness or, build our own awareness around these devices, but it's really hard. They're really convenient, I have an Amazon account and I order stuff because sometimes it's just impossible to get it anywhere else. It's this convenience, how far do you go? And I think if you're asking what home I wouldn't enter, something that kind of scared me personally was when we, sometimes have to book apartments in other cities for travel, and then people say, as an amenity, as a kind of to make their place more desirable, they write, it's a smart home. You have an Amazon Echo, because of course maybe it's easy for people to, go to a different city and just start asking this device questions. That kind of freaks me out. It freaks me out to go to, an apartment somebody is lending to me and to have a smart TV and kind of, then in the evening scroll through everything they've watched. It's just like, I should not have this information, So I think many times we're also we stumble upon these digital middlemen and they tell us stuff about people I kind of feel it's invading their privacy, What do I do with that feeling?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Roma, you want to add something?
Yeah, and also kind of like for us, it's an important question how to avoid the middleman. So kind of like when we started to do kind of like our practice, we tried to build our own infrastructure. So we're running our own email servers. We are running kind of like everything by ourselves. Also, just like to engage with the technology and try to learn from it. So we are able to also work with it like in an intervention or whatever. It just like becomes part of your repertoire. But also there you realize, okay, you don't have a Gmail address. You're running your own mail servers. It's hard work. You don't get flagged as spam all the time. And but then somebody shows up, like some statistics, and you realize, still 80% of your emails go to Google because there's always somebody with Gmail in your email thread, and the data is there anyway. Yeah. So you're kind of like confronted with this. You're trying to do it right, but you're still kind of like not making it. Kind of like that's.
You might have noticed that we have like this sub-theme of the domestic space that reappears. It's something that we have decided, and I think is a very fruitful one. And I like especially this comment on let's say the Airbnb or like the places you rent, because like there you have like this materialization of yet another middleman, which is a person. It's like a host that structured that house. So you have like, because like a question for us was like, okay, how do we picture this middleman? And of course we have the platform, etc. But there are like also people in between that want to live their lives in their own way, and then you have to engage with the space. And this leads me to let's say, let's try to frame this thought. I hope I manage. I'm gonna connect like the Alexa, the Echo, and the blinds, because like there is a cult horror Italian movie called The House of the Window That Smile. Already the title is a bit scary, and you remember there was like this case of like Alexa smiling, like laughing creepily in the night. In many of your works, there is like this idea, you even said it, for example, this idea of the haunting, the house that has like, it's weird because it has like this extra presence there. My question is like, how is it possible to create, what is the cozy house for you? Also starting from the fact that, let's say the scenario of like the music you produced is like that you have to pump it up to trigger the neighborhood. So like it seems to me that the homely house, the house you want to go, is like a party house, at least in this context. So what's about coziness? What's about like feeling at home and not estranged?
Yeah, I have an answer. As in, I think we talk about the technologies that you put in the home, but it also, I mean, the stuff that I'm looking at always presumes that you own a home. So think, when we talk about the domestic, there's already this other level of ownership. And other kind of middlemen, as in if you're renting, you're in a very different position. That is somehow never really addressed, right? So the tech is a solution to a problem that you may or may not have. And I think, like for me at least, I mean, kids I think are a good one, right? Where you like start entering stuff, like for yourself, you might have gotten used to a certain situation, a certain coziness as well. So it doesn't feel very creepy anymore. But baby monitors, for example, is a very heated topic, at least among my friends. Where it's like, do you buy the one that just like does the job, as in there's sound and like, you don't need Wi-Fi? Or do you buy the one with camera? Or do you buy the one with camera that's also on your smartphone? And I think there's a level of do you even need that information? And I think for some people, a level of information actually makes them feel much more comfortable, right? To me, it's the other end of the spectrum where I'm like, no, I don't need to see. There's also certain privacy to this child where I'm like, I don't need to see what you're doing, not because I'm going to otherwise feel frightened, but just because like I know you're okay. So I think, comfort, of course, is very personal. And to me, there is a level of, again, ambiguity or not knowing or, being able to close a door, to be in a private space. That comes with just not knowing everything, and that's okay. So a level of trust, I think, as well. And also trust that like stuff goes wrong and there's mistakes and like, walls are being written on and it's fine. But that's what happens in spaces. So I think, again, for one, ownership, definitely important and absolutely not something that most people, I think, can reach at this point, which I'm always really sort of struck by how that is absolutely not part of the narrative when they talk about smart homes. It's always a home, it's never a smart apartment. And then again, the sort of level of how much information do you actually want in your home beyond the technological, right? Like, just do you have open door policies or not? So I think it sort of begins before you start buying certain products. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think maybe like to think about comfort, there's something about desire and taste and how that's shaped. And so I'm thinking about sort of the smart imaginary and where that's come out of, right? And it's kind of important. I guess, I think we all know this, that smart technology, that term itself, it's a military term, right? And it kind of came out of the first Gulf War when ballistic missiles were made to be aware of themselves and to monitor and response. And so this kind of, cybernetic sort of dream feedback loop of constant monitoring, adjustment, adaptability, optimization, kind of comes out of Cold War sort of command and control doctrines. And so it kind of starts there. And, by sort of the 90s, Bill Clinton sort of signed a bill where military procurement has to be sort of outsourced to the private sector more. So you start to get like a whole bunch more sort of fluid, I guess, fluid programs and relationships happening between the private sector and the government. And so these technologies kind of come out, right? And first, at least in my sort of reading of it, smartness kind of hits the city in some way. And I think it's important that there's a lot of different types of smart imaginaries. At least when I was kind of doing the smart home, I was really finding these like amazing online forums that were much more DIY smart homes, where people were kind of creating, kind of like you guys, they were creating their own platforms, they were creating their own systems, they were creating their own, you know, they weren't getting locked into the ecosystems of one, and they were sort of, it was in the spirit of, I guess, of like home improvement in some way. And so that's been around since like at least like the 2000s, right? But it started to stabilize around like IKEA, I think around 2012 or something. Amazon purchases Wise around 2014. I can't quite remember the exact dates. It's in the film. I forgot it now. But so for a decade, you know, the smart home has been kind of experimented with, like large technology companies, but it doesn't quite land. And it doesn't land, I think, like until COVID, when, you know, a kind of a forced obsession with your interior and attempting to improve it and, you know, optimize it, let's say. And so there, all of a sudden, apartments do come into all of the advertising. So I see way more ways to kind of, like people are installing mood-shifting lights in their like tiny mezzanine in like this small New York apartment and like celebrating, right? Because that's just like slightly something about your interior atmosphere has changed and maybe become more comfortable. I'm not sure. So I think there is a kind of a novelty that gets explored when your interior condition is like the monotony of most of your life in some way. So that's a moment where I think comfort is shaped in some way. And so to the Airbnb, I've always been interested in how when Airbnb first sort of emerged as a platform, it marketed itself as some sort of cosmopolitan sort of, you know, there was this sort of mid-century modern domestic interior that everyone desired. And so that's connected to a kind of, you know, is it hygge, right? Kind of, these platforms shape desire and taste. So what's comfortable, I think it's important to say that to a degree, it's probably found in these data sets that you found, like that there is a kind of database-driven modulation of our taste and comfort. And I don't know, so convenience and optimization has entered into that now as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I totally agree. And I also think what the questions you raise with like the relationship of data and trust or data and control, you know, this idea that if I'm not wearing a heart rate monitor, I won't know how my body is doing. I need kind of the data about my body. You know, it's the same for the home or for any system. We've solved this idea that without the data, there's no truth or there's no knowing or seeing of something, which I find really interesting. And it's something I've tried to consciously, or we've tried to consciously resist, you know, this idea of controlling all situations. And I also, I mean, in our work, I think what's also really interesting is this idea of data control is also, it's being fed, you know, this idea of the intelligent or the smart. I mean, what is the smart? You know, oftentimes it's a room full of people, you know, we're very poorly paid laborers who have to sit there labeling data or, you know, sifting through data, making the devices intelligent. And that's also something that is always, it's kind of opaque, it's hidden. The device pretends to be smart and in control, but then when you look at it, it's kind of like, you know, I often wonder about this. So we're very much also interested in really taking apart these devices and kind of looking at, you know, where is the intelligence? And this is, yeah.
Great. Are you okay with a minute of awkward silence in which I open the floor for questions? Please.
So many people here and also in the stream. We would like to have the questions on microphone.
Yeah.
Please, if you have the microphones, talk into it directly so that the stream also understands.
So there's two sides of the coin here, I think. Some random thoughts, and I was interested in surveillance. I wrote it up for my MFA. One, the social contract in China for social credits. Do we like that? Is that perhaps one way we can control our society to minimize crime, or is it somehow unfair on people maybe with less intelligence who don't know how to deal with those rules and regs imposed on by the government as a middleman? And the other one is the other side of the coin that is beneficial to other people. Perhaps the middleman is Zoe, where I had a wire plugged into my subcutaneously into my arm to measure my glucose for 2 weeks, and then I had my poo sent off and my blood sent off, so I know exactly my biome and what the beneficial and the good guys and the bad guys in my gut, and how can I modify and control my glucose levels, which I'm pre-diabetic, so I was very interested in that. My wife had problems with her fat metabolism, and she was okay with her glucose. So all this stuff, now, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? It's still surveillance, it's still a middleman, and I don't think we can have some sort of cut and dried thing. I'd like to see more rules and safeguards, and our government in the UK is completely inept. But I'd like to see some people really getting deep into the government and saying, let's have some safe rules. We've left the EU, so fucking hell, we're in a mess now. But I'm just thinking, let's try and broaden this and think of the surveillance, good and bad. Any comments, please? I really welcome it. It's great talk.
Coming.
Yeah. Thank you for those thoughts and some good questions. I'm going to skip the China one because that one seemed murky to me, and I didn't like your sort of identification of the subjects of those surveillance systems. But yeah, I get this question all the time, which is smart cities, good or bad? The future, utopia or dystopia? And I think you're absolutely right that there's this kind of binary position that we're forced to think about the future in. And I'm saying, no, this isn't the future, this is the present, right? Like, what we're looking at is the present, and there's so much kind of attempting to create distance between the realities of now and to use sort of futurology and to use, Orit Halpern talks about prototyping, right? That there's always new technologies are always a prototype, and they're always like an experiment, and it's a way to hijack the future. It's a way to hijack the present by constantly pushing off things to the future. So I would say that you're absolutely right. It's more complex, right? And so in my work, what I've been trying to understand is what it means that your child is now an information subject, right? That your child is emerging and forming their psyche, understanding that they're producers of information and that they're sort of modulating themselves vis-a-vis these technical systems that surround them. And I totally think that, yes, for sure, there is like power relations around the operators of these systems, and right now many of the systems that surround us that we literally, even if we go to the hardcore level that you guys have gone to set up your own ecosystem, to participate in civic life and social life, you have to interface with them. And so it's a sort of asymmetry that we can't individually overcome, no matter how hard we try. And so in my work, I was attempting to individually overcome it by offering up another type of image archive to offset and balance the one that was being produced by the surveillance systems or the monitoring systems or the convenience systems that are installed in my house. So I feel like, yeah, like I'm thinking about like who are the operators and how we sort of understand their agenda and their motives, which is always, I guess, profit driven. So that tells us something. And then I'm also trying to understand what it means for us to form as informational subjects of these systems. But yeah, it's absolutely complex as fuck. And I think government, like collective sort of collective projects around holding government accountable are the only way to sort of confront some of these issues.
I'm going to take another question. Maybe another comment that maybe can help frame the issue. At least it helped it frame it for myself. And this, it's like, the question of like, what do you call surveillance? Where do you call it data collection? Because there are like some data collections that are necessary, that are like good, and you really need it, especially governmental one. I mean, we saw it during COVID, and so I think to think along that lines is very helpful. Where like do you call it like that? So you go beyond the good and bad. It's just like are two different practice somehow. There was a question there.
Oh, actually, a bunch of comments.
Please.
I'm gonna throw them in. Do whatever you want with them. Whenever I see images of smart cities, smart homes, I don't know why, but inevitably a book comes to mind. Jeff Mano's A Burglar's Guide to the City. For two reasons. One, because there's a lot of information out there for burglars in all these digital data broken things, if you can get into it. But also because it's fascinating to think in terms of a city as seen from the vantage point of a potential burglar, and also from the potential vantage point of some kind of digital entity like entering our houses. And that actually leads me to another thought that actually, Farzin, I think you said this looks like a house, but in fact it's a lab, for someone else. It might look like a house. Oh, maybe Simone, you said that. So it looks like a city. Maybe it's something different. Our eyes see that as a home, as a city, but it's something completely different, which also brings me to the idea of 3D assets, like something similar to the 17th century or maybe 18th century botanicists, taking picture of things and kind of representing things in their own way and building the world and building the knowledge to know the world. So that was my first comment, but whatever. The second one was about something you said about, you talked about trust and in a very interesting way. And this idea of building data layers about our bodies, about our emotions, about our living spaces is totally about trust, about control, but also about something that, advertisement here, we're going to deal with in another panel later on today, which is the speculative mind. Because we are gathering information, because we try to predict things, to be really in control, not controlling others, which is a very delicate issue, of course, and controlling space, controlling animals, whatever, but also controlling ourselves in terms of, I need to be ready for something that might happen. I want to know in advance. So this kind of speculative mind. You don't have to respond to that because we have a panel later. So no spoilers, okay?
I'm going to come to that panel and respond.
Okay, good. Okay, mission achieved. Exactly. And the third point was actually a question. We have been talking about, blah, 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 verbose.
We have time.
No, a question because we've been talking about, personal lives, objects, lifestyles, personal relationship, but we barely scratched the topic of labor, of working, which is also related to smart houses, but not just about it. And there's, of course, we all know that in the world we live in, especially in our countries, in some countries, for some people, there is a blurred distinction between leisure and work time. We know about that, but I still believe there is some time in our lives devoted to labor, with hierarchical structures and with a lot of digital middlemen in different respects. So if you want to add something about it. Thanks a lot.
Well, I want to pick up on something else you said, taxonomy. Because I think one thing, at least in my work, but this goes for any sort of middleman, also labor, is sorting and sort of making sense of the stuff that's been captured, right? And I think in the data sets that I'm looking at, where language is English, I think taxonomy as a system is something that is really Western, very colonial, right? It's like there's stuff we don't know, so I'm going to collect it and sort of sort it into categories that I've made up to make sense of this. I think there's a similar strategy within, the sort of data collection where you pick randomly, for now, again, it's English, in this stuff that I'm looking at, a language to sort objects. And at the same time, for me, the chair is, I think, always sort of an emblematic thing because we all can agree what it is. But at the same time, can we, right? Like, is it an object for sitting? Are you talking about a Western culture? Are you talking about different cultures? There's very different words for different sort of rituals that you might have, for different objects that you might have, which are completely not part of any of these data sets. And so I think in some sense, of course, smart that we talk about now is something you buy. It's a privileged thing. It leaves huge gaps and holes in, sort of creating a representation of society or the domestic. It's not doing that at all, right? It's just like a random assortment of things that, things being data, that people may have done. If it's, about blinds, how often do you open it? If it's about, again, sort of these things that I'm looking at, it's like a statistical representation of the amounts of chairs that were in the SketchUp warehouse. It's not a domestic space. And so I think there's something there that I'm like on another level, right? Before you get to the smart thing is like the cool object that brings us all together so we can talk about the complexities of that. But I think at the end of the day, it isn't really about that. It's about other sort of social structures that we've put in place, like taxonomy, that are sort of fucked up, right? But you still use them to create digital products now, and they're never really questioned. And so they sort of just prolongate, distribute, scale very differently issues and sort of violence that has already existed. But yeah, that's more just to the point of taxonomy. So in some ways, smart is just cool and fun, and it's a good entry point. But I think the history is much messier. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Thanks for your question around labor and this whole idea of data and smart. And we've been kind of trying to trace how, digital middlemen related to surveillance have been coming into the home through the pandemic's push of offices into the home. So at an office, or maybe I can start differently. I think you have this premise of Taylorism where the unobserved worker is an inefficient one. So this idea of you have to actually look at what somebody is doing all the time to ensure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And in an office, that usually means your boss is, there, can come walk around anytime and look at your screen and see whether you're playing, I don't know, solitaire or, doing whatever you're meant to do. But when work comes home with a pandemic and this idea of getting rid of the division between labor and leisure, you suddenly have the situation where a lot of tech in the form of making sure you're working is also pushed to the home. So you suddenly have, these management tools, these efficiency kind of calculators. And we've seen how that has been added on to nearly all the office tech during the pandemic. So Microsoft Teams, which is a system many offices use now, as a standard, has efficiency scores incorporated. So you can kind of click on any of your team members, go see what they've done all day, how much, what time did they spend on which kind of app. And I think that it's really interesting because it's a pandemic that kind of brought the push. So again, it's this, we have trust issues we need to control, so let's push all the privacy issues out of the way, and that's how it kind of comes in.
I think with the let's say with the pandemic, we had like a particular phenomenon which I find interesting: the fact that the house enters the let's say the public sphere of conversation in a very visual sense. It becomes like a matter of angle. And as a response to that, you have like even obfuscation by design. No, like you cover the background. Why do you do that? Generally, because like you want to hide the messiness of reality behind you. You know, the BBC clip, we all saw it. So my something I would like to reflect with you is like this idea of messiness and chaos. You try to actively introduce it in your work, and you know, there is always this big gap between like the image of the smart home, generally not only very clean but also very very empty. No, there is this emptiness. So what do you see like? Is there like a space for messiness, for like that kind of like the dust, you know, this kind of micro? I think Simone, given like homeschool, like there is a bit of vibe of mist, of things like that. Do you want to comment on this?
Sure. I mean, with, again, data sets, this is a problem, right? Where they realize, oh, this is not how people live. And there's been a term that's called daily life noise, which is sort of the struggle, right? It's like, how do we add that? And I think there's a level of, you know, objects, but there's also a level of sort of rituals. Like there was this one moment where, I think this was like 2015 or something, was in the newspapers that a Roomba has driven over the hair of a South Korean woman that was sleeping. And the headline was a sort of sensational thing of like, it's, you know, the Roomba's eaten her hair. And, you know, it's obviously not, and it's pointed to completely sort of different assumptions and sort of standards that have been built into this technology, which was, again, was sort of furniture to use to sleep. You know, if it's not sort of a bed that has a comforter and is a sort of very tall object, and you might sleep on the, you know, floor, futon, any sort of other object that, for whatever reason, the technology was not programmed to assume or predict, then it fails. And at the same time, also sleep times. Again, I think also to labor, right? It's like, what kind of work do you do? At what points do you sleep? At what points is the cleaning supposed to happen? What's your cleaning cycle? So there's all those sort of challenges, I think, where sort of the computer engineer creating these technologies is actually just very annoyed that there's people living in the spaces that these things are in, right? Because they're like, that is not handy. Like, I can't really program around this. And I think to this point, one like brilliant image for this was just now in January at CES in Las Vegas, this sort of technology fair, right, where all of this like new shiny stuff is presented. There was a new sort of booth. You shared this, right, of the drone. Ring now has this sort of drone, right, that sort of just flies around to sort of surveil your, well, maybe control or check your house, depending on how you feel about this thing. And the way they presented it is in a sort of container that has wallpaper with the furniture printed on it, right? So I think there's also this very sort of strange dream of sort of AR furniture, right? Of like, maybe I don't need things anymore. Yeah. So there's a sort of dream as well that probably we don't all share at all, of not owning things and being able to move around the world all the time. I do my work on my laptop, and so I don't actually need stuff. But when I do, you know, I'm very, very paranoid, and I do buy this drone, but it doesn't bump into anything there because there's nothing in that space. So I think, again, there's a lot to unpack there in terms of who makes the tech and what they expect their sort of clientele to live like, and it's probably a very small bubble.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about that drone? Because I think, because I think it's so fascinating. I'm so happy you reminded us of that. Because I think there's a shift with that drone. Because we were looking at it and we were saying, hang on a second, this is like not a cute drone. Like, this is a proper, like, cool, minimal military aesthetic, right? And so it's kind of, and I think this is, like, remember when, so it's the ways the rhetoric and the narratives around these technologies shift, and the way that it kind of has to first present itself as innocuous, then it had to present itself as indispensable and convenient, then it had to present itself as just I don't want to say pervasive, but everywhere, and now it has to like give you something new, right? Like once you've like saturated, it's like everywhere. It's like, okay, what do we do? Nobody wants cute dogs that like there's no more novelty there, and so this drone is basically, okay, we're going to tap into sort of militaristic sort of imaginaries now, because there is such a sort of a hunger around these and all sorts of. So for me, that drone is so problematic, but reflective of something, that some new shift that's happening, which is there's no longer any attempt to even aesthetically obfuscate the origins of the technologies, right? Like people just want weapons in their house, like that. Like I want to kind of have a military drone flying around my house. It has no real utility. It's just I've seen those things enough, and there's a desire for that kind of technology in some way that's shaped around a kind of militaristic vision. So I don't know, yeah.
Maybe there is also another reading that what's cute, it might be, it's like it might evolve, and you can look at military technology and think, this is cute. It's like.
But it's like I know, but it's like Apple gave us like that hardcore minimalism, right?
Yeah.
And so like I don't know, something about that aesthetic. I've got to spend time with it and try and unpack it, but it's just like I was like, whoa, like this is like looks pretty much like a drone.
Yeah. And in fact, this reminded me also like a definition of design I read recently, which is like domesticating tech, which connects a lot to this, like bringing it to the home somehow. Thinking of like the question of labor, maybe I would like also to try to chart, let's say, an emancipatory route of like, let's say, surveillance, control, etc. And I think, with your work with Taylorism, etc., there is something that can be brought up there. I'm thinking of Lilith Gilbreth, the wife of Frank Gilbreth. No, they were like both post-Taylorists, visualizing the home, and they did like an actual effort to, or at least like the hope was to make like labor in the kitchen more efficient, because after all, it's time that is used. Like for example, balancing, most of the surfaces. And coming up, you probably remember this, coming up with the idea of the trash bin that you can. So how do you feel about that now that you delved into a lot in that history of Taylorism, productivity, efficiency? Is there like something to say from that?
I mean, you mean to
to cherish?
Yeah.
Cherish.
Well, I mean, just quickly, I think, the joke about the Gilbreth couple is that she never worked in a kitchen. I mean, they weren't actually the workers they were making efficient. So I think in many cases, especially early Taylorism, had no clue about how people worked. So they put people who knew a lot about the tools they were using and the processes they were doing into factories and forced them to perform just like a tenth of the whole task and repeatedly do that, which makes people really unhappy, And then they were like, oh my God, why are people so unhappy, It's kind of like, there's not a lot of understanding of like the whole process of labor there. And it's also, I think, worryingly for us, this idea of how Taylorism sees efficiency has just one-to-one been pushed into the digital tools we now have controlling labor. And I think it's really important to remember that, in many of these discussions, many people say, well, it doesn't concern me because I'm a boss, or I manage a team, so I don't, have to deal with this surveillance technology. This is only happening in Amazon warehouses. But, you know, as we all know, and as Doctro has like really nicely described, there's technology runs on the shitty tech adoption curve. You know, it starts with the people who have no means of going against the technology. So these technologies start in the military, in prisons, at schools, and they go up the chain. So, I mean, whatever we're seeing, the future is we're all going to live under these technologies if we don't do something about it, and do something about it when it doesn't concern us yet. Because I think it's a lot easier to kind of go against it. And I think that bringing messiness into the system is, for me at least, a way of resisting these systems. They don't like messiness.
Yeah, and kind of like one of the examples we kind of like had, just like looking into kind of like surveillance software entering your home through the pandemic, was this idea that kind of like, you know, data produces realities nowadays. And the question is like, if you produce messy data, can you also produce a new reality which is kind of like formed around your interests or something as a tool also for interventions. So there were like these Chinese pupils in Wuhan which were pushed a app in the first pandemic year, which was also coming kind of like from managing labor software as a surveillance software, and they knew kind of like they have the state at home, like the camera goes on and off, and they used it for homeschooling, and they're not kind of like controlling the environment anymore. So what I really loved about them, that they realized where they need to attack to be critical, kind of like to explain their anger, is what they did was they formed some sort of like 10,000 of them went online at the same time. As a big crowd, and they went into the big app stores of Google, of Apple, of Baidu, of all these systems, and they downrated the app to 1 point, because they knew that also these mechanisms they're automated. Wow. So like when your app falls under a rating of 1.8, it gets kicked out, and then you can try to write to Google saying that this is all fake or whatever. It will take you weeks till you get an answer, because it's all out. I mean, like, there's no humans involved anymore. So I love this way of kind of like seeing those things and trying a way of kind of like also express like
collective action.
Yes, collective action. Yeah.
I believe that there was like a question there. Can someone bring the microphone? Is it over there, right? It's coming.
Hi.
Sorry, I thought.
So I just had I'm like fascinated about the point of the pork chop, and I just keep thinking about the middleman between you and your pork chop. And I've just been thinking on that, and like obviously I kind of started with the thought of, well, what do people want? Like, what do companies want with the data of how hot you cook your pork chop? But then, you know, I guess, and then the dog thing was like, oh, so we can get the robot dogs to cook the pork chops. And just like building on that, I'm like wondering, we're talking about like adoption of tech and like efficiency and stuff. And I suppose like, one, do you see a future in like where like cooking is automated? Like, you know, you can just, because obviously I don't know if you've seen those like pizza machines that you can get like 24-hour pizza, and it's like, you know, you can go in the night and you can choose like a margarita and it probably comes out and it's gross. I don't know. But yeah, like, do you see that is where it's going? And I suppose like, how do you see that being adopted? Like, if that is the case, do you see people using that? And then I suppose in terms of like efficiency and productivity, you're talking about work, like every kitchen that produces food, like if you can just get your pork chop cooked at the right temperature every time, like why would you want it to be nice or tasty or any kind of thing? You could just have it as it's supposed to be.
I'll start with the pork chop, which, by the way, was cooked really well, and the crew ate it. It was someone's first time eating a pork chop. They were like, you know, grew up in a Muslim family, but they weren't a Muslim anymore. I also was saying, I'm like, hey, if you're gonna have a pork chop, this might be the one. So I flipped a Muslim. Don't tell my mom. I think it's a really good point you're making, which I think we know this, like the logic of capitalism is to take something that is in public domain and surround it and then own access to it, right? And so that's maybe one way to, what you're saying is like, okay, like what I don't know, in this case, Weber and potentially anyone else they share their data with knows is, I have no idea, like I don't know, but perhaps they know when I'm cooking pork chops and for how long and that it's a pork chop, right? They know the type of meat I'm cooking. And so maybe later they're going to be like, oh my God, there's a stampede of pork chops. We need to come up with like a pork chop product, right? Like because they've already got the Weber. So, you know, I moved to the suburbs, I got a grill, like I've become a grill daddy. And like I'm getting obsessed with my Weber, like it's no coincidence. And then like Weber like advertised this like additional fish thing to me. I'm like, ooh, like I've done a lot of pork chops, maybe I need to do a fish thing now. You know, so I'm sure there's like some kind of marketing component to that for sure, right? And then this, obviously this pork chop app sits within the iPhone App Store. So there's like another layer of like middle management that gets added to that. And who knows, like, so kind of, I feel like it's these two things. It's not that the pork chop is no longer mine after I've purchased it, but it's that to produce the perfect pork chop, as you're saying, there's now like another layer of, there's another gate around it that Weber and Apple mediate, right, through my iPhone. And so I was kind of interested in that, but I was also just interested in kind of like what you were talking about, which is this kind of biometric monitoring kind of cultural obsession that's also being produced, right? That what can, like, if we can hook up if we can monitor a pork chop, like what's left to monitor, right? Like, does a pork chop really need to be monitored? Then I'll say the reverse. Once again, like the pork chop, I actually melted it, like the thing. So everything I got for that project, I returned and got my money back. But the pork chop thermometer, I accidentally put it on the hot thing and I melted it, so I couldn't return it. And then it was like hanging around there. And I, like a few barbecues later, I'm like, well, I might as well try it out for real. And now I use it all the time. And I realized, and I use it now for slow cooking, like this thing that I didn't do. And then I go out and 15 hours later, like, you know, so I'm just, there is desire and there's like new behaviors that are produced and owned. And none of these are bad or good. It's just who sits there and who captures and who monetizes. And I think like that's where, you know, like, so it's complex, right? So I think it is a kind of economic analysis, but it's also the data itself is kind of, maybe there's a value there that we're not totally sure about, that as digital laborers, we're producing that value. We suspect in aggregate it has some sort of value. I'm not sure.
I think there was another question, the last one that we can catch, I think. Yeah, let's see how long this will take. Yeah, oh, great idea, great idea. So we catch both the question. Please, okay, go ahead or comment.
Just the story about messiness, which I kind of fully follow. But I'm just wondering whether it might also be useful to talk about ambiguity and the fact that computation is by definition an act of disambiguation.
Right.
And that you can't have computational practice without disambiguation. And that's something that runs against a lot of cultural practice, which is all about problematizing and generating ambiguity, but also there can be destructive ambiguity as well. So when Roland Barthes unpacks the mythologies, he is in a sense disambiguating. And I think this dialectic between productive or generative disambiguation and the opposite, which is taylorization of our daily life, it needs to be in itself analysed in a bit more detail to get a sense of where the touch points are that might usefully help us go forward.
Thanks. Let's also catch a comment or question over there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, a little bit in the same vein that you were talking. So what I really liked about all your different talks was the idea of the Simone's talk about the hegemony of the hygge, of the home that's coming out, and then we had Farzin's the connection between this body capture and the migration and border regimes, which I thought was really to the point, and also the idea of the unheimlich, the uncanny that you get with the songs. So there's two questions basically that I want to kind of draw attention to that I think are really key in this whole smartification process. The first being, what is at stake for whom in that whole process? Because of course we all have different perspectives and kind of uncertainties and risks of being engulfed by that process. And I'm talking here like the kind of privileged homeowners and the ones who are actually denied homes actively through these technologies. And I think that's really important to remember. And then in terms of the notion of the middleman, I was thinking it does have, to me, also as a historian, anthropologist, a little bit of a difficult connotation with the whole body of critique that was coming out in the 30s in terms of the capitalist critique that also swapped into an anti-Semitism. And so thinking of middleman in that regard, you might want to precise who exactly you're criticizing, what exact processes, and whether there could be notions that might be less colored, let's say, by that past. So that would be my comment.
Thanks so much for both comments. We have really the time for a quick reply to both, if you want to respond. If any of you, Simone?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll try to combine ambiguity and what's at stake. I mean, for one, I think the ambiguity reads like the mission statement of my practice, where I'm like, yes, that's what we need. But it's also, what's at stake is, I think, what Edouard Glissant beautifully and poetically puts as the right to opacity, right? Where there is a loss of, however we call this, opacity, privacy, messiness, life. And I think, for me, at the end of the day, it is work about technology, but it's made by humans for humans, like, stupidly put. But so to me, what's at stake is essentially life. It's like that I can do stuff. The domestic becomes a very sort of, essential scene or scenography for this. But it does feel like that oftentimes, where it's like, can I still make a decision? Can I still breathe? Am I allowed to turn up the heat a little bit now that the costs are high? And maybe someone you're renting from can actually tell that you're turning up the heat, but they don't actually have any context of why I want to do this. So I think there's a level of freedom that, to me at least, really amounts to just being able to exist. And, I think, again, without a binary, because I think that can feel really existential. But it doesn't have to. It's more just, why can't we just move through spaces and keep on making decisions without being tied to larger systems? And I think the work, at least, that we've sort of been seeing here today is as well that at some point, you do need collective action. I think mutual aid is also a word that's been thrown around about during the corona crisis, mainly because I think as an individual, you're not so much in control of whatever we call systems now, because you might, buy a boutique sort of smart tech item because you think, now I know who sort of is capturing. It's a small studio in Berlin that is like creating this cool thing, and they sort of host their stuff on Nextcloud, and it's okay. But, most probably they're going to be bought up by a larger entity at some point. And sort of tracking that of like who's buying who, what sort of acquisitions happen, what sort of data sets are shared, I think is an important part of that work. But at the end of the day, also sort of, using everyone that is against something, I think, to the beautiful example of Doma as well in Wuhan, where it's like you do have a voice there, but probably not your own. You need to find others. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much for your time and your patience to be here through this quite deep conversation. I just want to close with a positive note. You might have heard that Marie Kondo, who was like going with tidiness and order, changed their mind. So chaos can spark joy. Messiness is cool again. Thanks so much.